Hey there, folks. Welcome back to another episode of Legends and Lore, the podcast where we dive into the strange, the mysterious, and the downright unsettling. I'm your host, David Culpepper, and today, well, let's just say we're heading into some legendary territory. Now, before we jump in, I've got to admit this week's topic has been on my mind a lot lately. Maybe it's because every time I see a giant shadow out of the corner of my eye, I immediately assume it's either Mothman or just my laundry pile shifting ominously. Spoiler, 9 times out of 10, it's the laundry. But that lingering sense of what if, that's the feeling we're leaning into today. Because today we're talking about the Mothman prophecies, not just the sightings, but the legacy, the fear, and the ripple effects that stretch far beyond a small town in West Virginia. You might think you know the story. A winged creature with glowing red eyes, spotted by terrified locals in Point Pleasant back in the 1960s. But Mothman isn't just another cryptid flapping around in the shadows. The story is layered with tragedy, conspiracy, and an eerie sense of something much bigger, lurking beneath the surface. Picture this, November 1966, Point Pleasant, West Virginia, a quiet town nestled by the Ohio River where life moves at an easy pace until a pair of couples driving near an old munitions plant known as the TNT area encounter something they'll never forget. A creature towering over 6 feet tall, with massive wings and glowing red eyes that pierce through the darkness. They're terrified, speeding away down winding country roads, but here's the thing. It follows them. Not running. Flying. Matching their car's speed effortlessly. Sounds like the start of a horror movie, right? But it didn't end there. Over the next year, dozens of people reported similar sightings of this winged figure lurking near roadsides, perched on rooftops, even chasing cars. And then, almost exactly a year later, tragedy struck. The Silver Bridge, a vital link between Point Pleasant and Ohio, collapsed during rush hour traffic, killing 46 people. And guess who was reportedly seen near the bridge in the days leading up to the disaster? That's right, Mothman. But the story doesn't stop there. The Mothman legend is tangled up with other bizarre phenomena. Strange lights in the sky, mysterious phone calls, shadowy figures known as the Men in Black. It's not just a story about a cryptid, it's about fear, prophecy, and the human need to make sense of the unexplainable. Was Mothman a harbinger of doom, a warning, a creature out of time or out of this world? Or was it something more mundane wrapped in the fabric of folklore and mass hysteria? Over the next hour, we're going to unpack it all. We'll explore the original sightings, dig into the Silver Bridge tragedy, follow the trail of the Men in Black, and look at how Mothman has flown from local legend to cultural icon. We'll also dive into some of the theories, from the plausible to the downright bizarre. So whether you're a die-hard cryptid enthusiast, a skeptic who's just here for the weird stories, or someone who's now reconsidering every bird they've ever seen perched ominously on a power line, buckle up, because this story has wings, literally. To understand the legend of Mothman, we have to go back to where it all began, Point Pleasant, West Virginia, in the late fall of 1966. It's the kind of small town where everyone knows everyone, life moves at an easy pace, and the biggest excitement might have been the high school football game on Friday night. But that peace was shattered by a series of events that would ripple far beyond the quiet streets of this riverside town. November 15th, 1966. It's a chilly, clear night. 2 young couples, Roger and Linda Scarberry and Steve and Mary Millette, are out for a drive. They decide to cruise around the old TNT area, an abandoned World War II munitions site on the outskirts of town. Picture this: rows of decaying concrete domes, rusted fences, and dark, overgrown trails. The perfect backdrop for something strange. As they drove along the isolated road, their headlights caught something that didn't belong. Standing near an old generator plant was a creature, tall and dark, with glowing red eyes reflecting back at them. Not like the soft glow of an animal's eyes in the dark. No, these were intense, burning like embers. The creature stood about 6 to 7 feet tall, with massive wings folded against its back, and a humanoid shape that was almost, but not quite, right. Linda Scarberry later described it as gray, with wings tucked in like it didn't belong in this world. Naturally, they did what any reasonable person would do. They floored it. But here's where things get really strange. As they sped away, hitting over 100 miles per hour down that dark stretch of road, the creature didn't stay behind. It followed them, effortlessly keeping pace, gliding silently above their car. Not flapping its wings, not struggling to keep up, just coasting, smooth as silk, like it was floating on an invisible current of air. Now, I don't know about you, but if something like that was chasing me, I'd have to pull over. Not because of the creature, but because I'd probably need a fresh pair of pants, and yet, somehow, they managed to keep driving, hearts racing, until they made it back to town, where they immediately went to the Mason County Sheriff's Office. They were shaken, genuinely terrified, describing what they'd seen with the kind of conviction that's hard to fake. But the Scarberrys and the Millettes weren't the only ones who saw something strange that week. Just days earlier, on November the 12th, 5 grave diggers in the nearby town of Clendenin were working when they noticed a large dark figure soaring above the trees. They described it as man-like, with wings. Now, I'm no expert on burial practices, but I'd imagine grave digging is already eerie enough without a flying humanoid making a cameo appearance. More sightings followed. A local man reported seeing a large bird-like creature perched on his roof, its glowing eyes staring down at him. Others described similar encounters, always the same details: glowing red eyes, wings with an enormous span, and an overwhelming sense of dread that seemed to accompany the creature's presence. People were locking their doors, carrying shotguns, and whispering about the Birdman and the winged thing, and eventually the name that stuck, Mothman. What's fascinating about these accounts isn't just the fear they inspired, but how consistent the descriptions were. The glowing red eyes are perhaps the most iconic detail, often described as hypnotic, piercing, and utterly inhuman. There's something about red eyes in the dark that taps into a primal fear, the fear of predators lurking just beyond the edges of the firelight. The creature's wingspan, estimated at 10 to 15 feet, adds another layer to the unease. Wings that large aren't just unsettling, they're impossible, at least for anything we know to exist. And then there's the silence. Witnesses often noted that Mothman's wings didn't make any noise even when it was flying at high speeds. It's as if the laws of physics took a break whenever this thing showed up. I mean, I've seen pigeons flap around like it's the end of the world just trying to cross a street. But a creature the size of a man gliding silently like it's on cruise control, that's next level spooky. So, what was it? A rare bird? A cryptid? An omen of something darker? The people of Point Pleasant didn't have answers, but they did have fear. And as the sightings continued, that fear grew, spreading through the town like wildfire, setting the stage for one of the most tragic events in West Virginia's history. If there's one place that feels like the beating heart of the Mothman legend. It's the TNT area, a name that sounds like it belongs in a comic book, but trust me, the reality is far stranger than fiction. Officially known as the McClintock Wildlife Management Area, this stretch of land just outside Point Pleasant was once home to a bustling World War II munitions facility. Picture miles of overgrown woods, crumbling concrete bunkers, rusted metal doors hanging off their hinges, and long-forgotten tunnels snaking beneath the ground. It's the kind of place that practically begs for ghost stories, and Mothman didn't disappoint. During World War II, this site was part of the West Virginia Ordnance Works, a massive complex dedicated to manufacturing and storing explosives. The landscape is dotted with these strange dome-shaped structures called igloos, used to safely store TNT and other volatile materials. They were designed to contain blasts in case of an accident, which, is comforting. Because nothing says relaxing evening stroll like wandering through abandoned bomb shelters. After the war, the facility was decommissioned and nature began to reclaim the land, but the remnants of its explosive past remained, literally. To this day, the area is considered environmentally hazardous due to chemical contamination from leftover munitions, which means not only could you potentially run into Mothman out there, but you might also glow in the dark afterward. It's like a 2-for-1 paranormal special. So why did Mothman choose this place to make his grand debut? Well, that's where things get interesting. The first major sighting, the one we talked about earlier with the Scarberries and the Millettes, happened right here near the old generator plant within the TNT area. And it wasn't just a one-time event. Over the next year, many of the reported Mothman encounters occurred in or around this eerie stretch of land. Some people believe the location itself might be the key. The TNT area isn't just creepy because of its abandoned buildings. It's steeped in an atmosphere of secrecy, decay, and, frankly, bad vibes. Think about it, a place designed to produce tools of destruction, later left to rot, filled with dark tunnels and hidden spaces. It's like the perfect setting for something otherworldly to linger. Others have speculated that the chemical contamination in the area could have mutated local wildlife, giving rise to the legend. Maybe Mothman was just an oversized bird who had a bit too much exposure to, let's call it, government seasoning. Or, if you're more into the paranormal side of things, some believe the TNT area's history of violence and secrecy created a kind of spiritual scar on the land, making it a magnet for unexplained phenomena. Fast forward to today, and the TNT area has become a pilgrimage site for Mothman enthusiasts, paranormal investigators, and the occasional thrill-seeking teenager with a flashlight and questionable decision-making skills. People still report strange sightings, glowing eyes in the dark, shadowy figures flitting between the trees, and even unexplained sounds echoing from the abandoned igloos. Of course, those unexplained sounds could just be raccoons because, nature doesn't stop being weird just because we're looking for cryptids. Paranormal investigators have conducted numerous studies in the area, using everything from night vision cameras to electromagnetic field detectors. Some claim to have captured mysterious orbs of light, strange noises, or even fleeting glimpses of a large, winged figure in the distance. And while skeptics might dismiss these as tricks of the light or overactive imaginations, there's something undeniably chilling about us standing in a place where so many strange things have been reported. The TNT area isn't just the backdrop for the Mothman legend, it's a character in the story itself. A place where history, mystery, and fear intertwine. Whether you believe Mothman is a mutated creature, a supernatural entity, or just the product of mass hysteria, one thing's for sure. There's something about that land that makes people feel watched. December 15th, 1967, started like any other winter day in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. The air was crisp with a bite of December chill, and the town was buzzing with holiday cheer. People were out shopping, running errands, getting ready for Christmas just 10 days away. But by the end of that day, Point Pleasant would be forever marked by tragedy. A tragedy that many believe was foreshadowed by the mysterious figure we've come to know as Mothman. The Silver Bridge was an essential part of life in Point Pleasant. Built in 1928, it stretched across the Ohio River, connecting West Virginia to Gallipolis, Ohio. It wasn't just a bridge, it was a vital artery carrying thousands of cars and trucks every day. But beneath its sturdy-looking steel exterior, a hidden flaw was waiting, a flaw that would turn rush hour into a nightmare. At around 5 p.m., the bridge was packed with cars, their headlights reflecting off the steel beams as the sun dipped below the horizon. Without warning, there was a sudden, terrifying noise, a metallic groan, like the earth itself crying out. Witnesses described hearing what sounded like gunshots or explosions, but it wasn't gunfire. It was the sound of steel snapping under unimaginable stress. In just under a minute, the entire bridge collapsed into the freezing waters of the Ohio River below. Cars plunged into the river, tangled in twisted metal and shattered concrete. 46 people lost their lives that day, many drowning as their vehicles sank into the dark, icy depths. It was chaos. Sirens wailing, people screaming, and a thick, unnatural silence that followed as the dust settled. But here's where the story takes an even stranger turn. In the days and weeks leading up to the disaster, dozens of people reported seeing Mothman near the bridge. Some claimed to have seen a large winged figure perched on the bridge's steel beams, its red eyes glowing like warning lights in the fading winter sun. Others reported eerie noises, strange screeches echoing through the night, coming from the direction of the bridge. One particularly chilling account comes from a woman named Virginia Thomas, who claimed to have seen Mothman hovering above the bridge just days before the collapse. She described feeling an overwhelming sense of dread, like something terrible was about to happen. But what could she do? How do you report something like that? "Excuse me, officer. I'd like to report a giant flying creature with glowing red eyes hanging out by the bridge." Yeah, not exactly the kind of call that gets taken seriously. After the collapse, people couldn't help but connect the dots. The sightings, the sense of impending doom, the mysterious figure vanishing from Point Pleasant almost as quickly as it appeared. It all seemed too strange to be a coincidence. Some believe Mothman was a harbinger of doom, a supernatural warning sign sent to alert people of the disaster to come. Others think it was more than just a warning, that Mothman was somehow linked to the tragedy, either as its cause or as a consequence of forces beyond our understanding. But here's the thing, Mothman sightings almost completely stopped after the bridge collapsed. It's as if whatever purpose the creature served, whether as a messenger, an omen, or something else entirely, had been fulfilled. And that's what keeps people wondering. Was Mothman trying to warn us, or was it simply drawn to the impending disaster, like a cosmic moth to a very tragic flame? Of course, not everyone buys into the supernatural angle. The official investigation determined that the collapse was due to a structural failure, a small defect in a single eye bar, a critical piece of the bridge's suspension system, just a tiny crack hidden by years of wear and tear, was enough to set off a catastrophic chain reaction. It's a sobering reminder of how fragile even the strongest-looking structures can be. But while science can explain how the bridge collapsed, It can't explain why so many people reported strange sightings leading up to it. Was it just mass hysteria? A case of people connecting unrelated events because the human brain is wired to find patterns even where none exist? Maybe. Or maybe there's more to it, something we're not meant to understand. Either way, it makes you wonder. If you see a giant winged creature with glowing red eyes hanging around your local bridge, maybe take the long way home, just in case. The Silver Bridge collapse was a tragedy that left a permanent scar on Point Pleasant. But for many, it wasn't just a tragic accident. It was the climax of a year filled with fear, mystery, and unanswered questions. And as we move forward in the story, we'll dive deeper into those questions, exploring the strange men in black who appeared in town, the theories that link Mothman to UFOs, and the legacy that keeps this legend alive to this day. Now, if you thought the story of Mothman was strange enough with just a giant winged creature, glowing red eyes, and tragic bridge collapses, buckle up, because this is where things get even weirder. You see, Mothman isn't just tied to cryptid lore. It's tangled up in a web of conspiracies that involve UFOs, shadowy government figures, and the infamous men in black. And no, I'm not talking about Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones here. The real men in black are a whole lot less charming and a whole lot creepier. Although, let's be honest, a little alien memory wiping gadget would have been pretty useful for some of the folks in Point Pleasant. Enter John Keel, the journalist and paranormal investigator who brought Mothman into the national spotlight with his book, The Mothman Prophecies. Keel didn't just stroll into Point Pleasant to write a simple local legend story. He got pulled deep into a bizarre series of events that made him question everything he thought he knew. Keel arrived in Point Pleasant in 1966, shortly after the first Mothman sightings. But he wasn't just interested in the creature itself. He noticed that people who reported seeing Mothman also experienced other strange phenomena. We're talking about UFO sightings, mysterious lights in the sky, and even unusual visitors. Keel began receiving strange phone calls, often filled with static and distorted voices that seemed to know personal details about his life, things he'd never shared publicly. He wasn't alone, either. Witnesses who had reported Mothman sightings described being approached by men dressed in black suits, driving black cars, and asking unsettling questions. These men in black weren't your typical government agents. They didn't flash badges or give official titles. In fact, they often behaved off. Witnesses described them as having pale skin, oddly shaped faces, and speaking in monotone voices, like they were trying to mimic human behavior but didn't quite get it right. Imagine if someone Googled how to act normal and followed the instructions way too literally. That's the vibe we're talking about. One woman, Mary Heyer, a local reporter covering the Mothman sightings, claimed she was visited by a strange man who wore thick glasses, had oddly hypnotic eyes, and asked her bizarre questions about local UFO activity. He wasn't interested in the news, he was interested in her, and when she refused to cooperate, he became visibly agitated, almost robotic in his frustration. Others reported similar encounters, men with strange, outdated clothing, speaking in peculiar patterns and asking about the witnesses' experiences, but that also about things that had nothing to do with Mothman. Some people felt intimidated, even threatened, though these men in black rarely resorted to outright aggression. It was more about psychological pressure, like they were trying to erase the story before it could spread. So, what's the connection? Are the men in black part of some government cover-up? Were they trying to suppress information about Mothman and UFOs, or both? Or, stay with me here, were they not human at all? Here's where things get really tangled. While Mothman sightings were happening, there was also a spike in UFO activity around Point Pleasant. People reported strange lights in the sky, unexplained aircraft, and even encounters with beings that didn't seem entirely terrestrial. John Keel himself theorized that Mothman, UFOs, and the Men in Black were all part of the same phenomenon, a broader tapestry of high strangeness that defied easy explanations. Which, makes my job easier and harder at the same time. Easier because there's so much to talk about, but not harder because, well, where do you even start to unraveling that? Some believe the Men in Black are part of a secret government agency tasked with covering up paranormal events, and others think they're extraterrestrials in disguise, or interdimensional beings trying to keep humanity from poking around where we don't belong. And then there's the theory that they're psychological projections, manifestations of the very fear and paranoia they seem to feed on. Whatever they are, their presence in Point Pleasant added another layer of mystery to an already bizarre story. Mothman wasn't just a creature sighted in the woods. It became part of a much larger puzzle involving government secrecy, cosmic warnings, and the fragile line between reality and the unknown. So, was Mothman just a cryptid lurking in the shadows, or was it part of something much bigger? Something we weren't meant to understand? Maybe the Men in Black were there to keep the truth hidden. Or maybe the truth was never meant to be uncovered at all. So far, we've talked about the real-life events that unfolded in Point Pleasant, the sightings, the tragedy, the conspiracies. But how did this local legend become a cultural phenomenon, one that's known far beyond the borders of West Virginia? Well, that's where the Mothman Prophecies, both the book and the film, come into play. They didn't just document the legend, they shaped it, adding layers of intrigue, mystery, and, yes, a little Hollywood flair. Let's start with John Keel's book, The Mothman Prophecies, published in 1975. Keel wasn't your typical journalist. He was part investigator, part adventurer, and part philosopher, a man fascinated by the unexplained. When he arrived in Point Pleasant during the height of the Mothman sightings, he thought he was chasing down a simple cryptid story. But what he found was something much stranger. A tangled web of paranormal events, UFO sightings, Men in Black encounters, and a creeping sense of doom that seemed to hang over the town like a fog. Keel's book isn't just a collection of eyewitness accounts, it's a deep dive into the bizarre where the lines between reality and the paranormal blur. He wasn't afraid to connect the dots, even if those dots seemed completely unrelated at first glance. In his mind, Mothman wasn't just a creature. It was part of a much larger phenomenon, one that defied easy explanations. Reading the Mothman Prophecies feels less like flipping through a history book and more like getting lost in someone's fever dream. Keel's writing pulls you into the paranoia, the fear, and the sense that something unseen is always just around the corner. He didn't just report the story, he lived it. And by the time you finish the book, you're left wondering if maybe, just maybe, the world is stranger than we're willing to admit. Also, fair warning, if you read it at night, you'll probably find yourself staring at the corner of your room, wondering if that shadow was always there. Fast forward to 2002, when Hollywood decided to bring the legend to the big screen with the Mothman Prophecies, starring Richard Gere. Now, if you're expecting a shot-for-shot retelling of the events in Point Pleasant, you might be a little surprised. The film takes some creative liberties because, well, that's what Hollywood does best. Let's be honest, though. If Richard Gere had been running around rural West Virginia in the 60s, I'm pretty sure he would have been the bigger story on Mothman or not. The movie follows Gere's character, John Klein, a journalist whose wife dies under mysterious circumstances after a strange encounter with, you guessed it, the Mothman. Obsessed with uncovering the truth, he ends up in Point Pleasant, where he's drawn into a series of eerie events, bizarre phone calls, strange sightings, and that looming sense of impending doom. While the film takes liberties with the details, it nails the atmosphere. There's this constant feeling of unease, like reality is just a little bit off. The scenes where characters receive cryptic phone calls from an entity named Indrid Cold, a figure tied to both UFO lore and Keel's real-life accounts, are genuinely unsettling. It's not the jump scares that get you. It's the creeping paranoia, the idea that something is watching, always just out of sight. Although, I will say, Hollywood missed a golden opportunity for a Mothman musical number. I mean, if you're going to take creative liberties, why not go all the way? Here's the thing. Before Keel's book and the movie, Mothman was largely a local legend whispered about in Point Pleasant and surrounding areas. But after the Mothman Prophecies hit shelves and later movie screens, the legend exploded into pop culture. Suddenly, Mothman wasn't just West Virginia's winged mystery. It was an icon of the paranormal, joining the ranks of Bigfoot, the Jersey Devil, and the Loch Ness Monster. Point Pleasant embraced the legend, too. Today, the town hosts an annual Mothman Festival, complete with guest speakers, vendors, tours of the TNT area, and, yes, a giant metallic Mothman statue right in the heart of town. If you've never seen it, picture a chiseled superhero version of Mothman, with abs that could put a Marvel character to shame. Apparently, even cryptids need to hit the gym. Mothman has also found his way into comics, video games, podcasts, and internet memes. He's gone from being a figure of fear to something almost endearing. There's Mothman plushies, coffee mugs, even dating profiles online where people claim, looking for someone who loves long walks in the TNT area and isn't afraid of glowing red eyes. But beneath all the pop culture fun, the core of the legend remains. A story about fear, mystery, and the human need to make sense of the unknown. Keel's book and the film adaptation didn't just document the Mothman legend, they transformed it, turning a series of strange sightings into a symbol of something bigger, a reminder that sometimes the scariest things aren't the creatures lurking in the dark, but the questions we can't answer. Whether you believe Mothman was a supernatural being, a harbinger of doom, or just a really misunderstood bird, one thing's for sure, his story has left an indelible mark on our culture. And as we move forward, we'll dive even deeper into the theories surrounding Mothman. Because trust me, the weirdness is far from over. After everything we've covered, the sightings, the Silver Bridge collapse, and the Men in Black, and the cultural phenomenon, you're probably wondering the same thing people in Point Pleasant were asking back in 1966. What exactly is the Mothman? Was it a creature, a warning, government experiment gone wrong, or something even stranger? Well, let's dive into some of the most popular theories. And trust me, some of these get pretty wild. Let's start with the most grounded explanation, the idea that Mothman was just, an animal. A big, weird, terrifying animal, but an animal nonetheless. Some cryptozoologists and skeptics believe Mothman could have been a large bird, like a sandhill crane. Now, sandhill cranes are tall, about 4 to 5 feet, with a wingspan of up to 7 feet, and they do have reddish patches around their eyes. Of course, I've never seen a sandhill crane chase a car at 100 miles per hour, but hey, maybe this one was hitting the gym with the Mothman statue in Point Pleasant. Another theory suggests it could have been an owl, specifically a barred owl or a barn owl. Owls have that eerie reflective eye glow when light hits them at night, and they can appear much larger when they fluff their feathers. But here's the thing. People describe Mothman as massive, with wings spanning 10 to 15 feet. That's not an owl. That's something else. Could it have been an undiscovered species, some kind of rare prehistoric holdover that managed to stay hidden until 1966? It's possible. But considering the number of sightings, you'd think someone would have snapped a clearer photo by now. Then again, cryptids seem to have an unspoken rule about avoiding high-definition cameras. Now, if the bird theory doesn't ruffle your feathers, let's get into the paranormal stuff. Some believe Mothman isn't a creature at all, but a supernatural entity, maybe even a harbinger of doom. Think of it like the Grim Reaper with wings showing up before disasters as a cosmic warning sign. This theory gained traction because Mothman sightings seemed to peak right before the Silver Bridge collapse. Interestingly, there are similar legends from other parts of the world. The banshee from Irish folklore, for example, is said to wail before a death. In Germany, there's the Freiburg Shrieker, a winged creature allegedly seen before a mine collapsed. Could Mothman be part of this same mythological thread? A creature that doesn't cause disasters but warns of them? Then there's the interdimensional theory, the idea that Mothman isn't from here at all. Maybe it slipped through a crack between worlds, like cosmic roadkill on the highway of parallel universes. Witnesses often describe Mothman as not just physically strange, but as something that feels wrong, like it doesn't belong in our reality. Could it be a traveler from another dimension, here to observe, or maybe even influence events in our world? If that's the case, I hope Mothman has a good travel rewards program, because popping in and out of dimensions must rack up some serious miles and points. Of course, not every explanation involves cryptids or cosmic portals. Some psychologists suggest that the Mothman phenomenon could be a case of mass hysteria, a psychological phenomenon where a group of people start to experience similar symptoms or beliefs, often triggered by stress or fear. Think of it like the world's creepiest game of telephone. Point Pleasant in the 1960s was a small, close-knit town. When the first Mothman sighting made the news, it didn't take long for more reports to follow. Were people genuinely seeing something, or were their minds filling in the blanks? And when you're already on edge, a shadow in the woods or a pair of reflective eyes can easily become something more. Another angle is the idea of collective trauma. The Silver Bridge collapse was a devastating event, and sometimes communities create narratives to help process tragedy. Could Mothman have become a symbol, a way to externalize fear and grief? It's not that people were lying or imagining things on purpose. It's that our brains are really good at connecting dots, even when those dots don't actually form a clear picture. Now let's crank up the weird factor. Conspiracy theories around Mothman are wild, and I love every second of it. One popular theory is that Mothman was the result of a government experiment, some secret project gone wrong. The TNT area, after all, was a former munitions site. Maybe Mothman was a mutated creature, an experiment in flight technology, or even a biological weapon that escaped. Then there's the time traveler theory. Yep, some folks believe Mothman isn't a creature at all, but a human or something from the future. Think about it. What better way to observe historical disasters than with the ability to fly, avoid human interaction, and not worry about blending in because, well, you're already terrifying? And if Mothman is a time traveler, I hope they've learned by now that showing up dramatically right before disasters isn't exactly the best way to keep a low profile. Then, last but certainly not least, the alien theory. Some believe Mothman is an extraterrestrial scout here to study humanity, or maybe to observe specific events. The glowing red eyes, the strange flight patterns, the connection to UFO sightings, it all fits neatly into the alien hypothesis. And when you throw the Men in Black into the mix, the theory starts to feel like an episode of the X-Files waiting to happen. So, what is Mothman? A bird, a warning, a visitor from another dimension, or just the product of our minds trying to make sense of the unknown? The truth is, we may never know, but maybe that's what keeps the legend alive. The mystery, the unanswered questions, and the possibility that even today, something with glowing red eyes might still be watching from the shadows. Up until now, we've been grounded in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, where the legend of Mothman was born. But what if I told you that the story doesn't stop there? Sightings of Mothman, or creatures that bear a striking resemblance to him, have been reported all over the world. It's almost as if the phenomenon isn't tied to one place or time, but is part of a larger global mystery. Today we're taking Mothman International. We'll explore encounters from across the globe, from shadowy winged creatures in the misty forests of the UK to ominous sightings above modern city skylines. Because while Mothman might have made his debut in Point Pleasant, he, or something like him, seems to have a passport. Let's start across the pond in Cornwall, England. In the 1970s, locals reported sightings of a creature known as the Owl Man. First spotted in 1976 near the village of Mothman, the Owl Man was described as a large winged humanoid with glowing red eyes and a wingspan that could rival Mothman's. Witnesses claimed it had feathered wings, clawed feet, and made eerie screeching noises, kind of like an owl on steroids, which honestly is terrifying because regular owls are already unsettling enough. Seriously, have you ever heard an owl screech in the dead of night? It's like nature's way of reminding you that you're really not alone in the woods. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The sightings often occurred near old churches and ancient sites, places steeped in local folklore. Some believe the Owl Man is connected to ancient pagan legends, while others think it's just Mothman on a European vacation. Either way, the similarities are hard to ignore. Glowing red eyes, large wings, and a tendency to terrify anyone who crosses its path. Heading over to Germany, we have the Freiburg Shrieker. In 1978, a group of miners in Freiburg encountered a bizarre humanoid figure with large wings and glowing red eyes blocking the entrance to a mine. The creature let out a terrifying shriek, hence the name, and refused to move. The miners, understandably spooked, decided to head back. Just hours later, the mine collapsed. If they hadn't turned around, they likely would have been crushed. Sound familiar? A winged, ominous figure appearing right before disaster strikes. It's almost like Mothman got a side gig as an international disaster consultant. These stories from different parts of the world share striking commonalities, even though they occurred decades apart and in completely different cultural contexts. That's what makes it all the more intriguing. Now, fast forward to the 2010s, and Mothman seems to have developed a taste for deep dish pizza, or at least the Chicago skyline. Between 2011 and 2017, there was a surge of sightings in Chicago and the surrounding areas. Witnesses described seeing a large winged creature with glowing red eyes flying over parks, buildings, and even near O'Hare International Airport. One of the most well-documented clusters of sightings happened in 2017, with over 50 reports coming in throughout the year. People describe the same eerie details: massive wings, glowing red eyes, and a sense of overwhelming dread. Some witnesses claimed it flew silently, and while others reported hearing a low humming sound, almost like mechanical buzzing. Now, here's where it gets even creepier. Some of these sightings occurred near places where accidents or emergencies happened shortly after. It's almost as if Mothman, or whatever this entity is, was once again appearing as some kind of ominous warning. Is it the same Mothman from Point Pleasant? A different creature entirely? Or is the legend evolving with new sightings feeding into the mythology? Whatever the case, the Chicago wave of sightings reignited interest in the Mothman phenomenon, proving that the legend is far from over. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Mothman legend is the pattern that seems to emerge across different sightings, times, and places. Whether it's the Silver Bridge collapse in West Virginia and the Freiburg mine disaster in Germany, or the string of emergencies in Chicago, the sightings often seem to precede or coincide with tragedy. Is this just coincidence? Are we seeing connections because we want to find patterns in the chaos? Or is there something more to it? Maybe Mothman, or entities like it, are drawn to places where something catastrophic is about to happen, like cosmic first responders, minus the helpful part. Seriously, though, if Mothman's job is to warn us, he's got a pretty terrible communication strategy. I mean, glowing eyes and ominous staring. Maybe try a strongly worded email next time. But, in all seriousness, the global nature of these sightings suggests that the phenomenon isn't limited to one culture or one type of event. It taps into something universal: our fear of the unknown, our instinct to find meaning in tragedy, and our need to believe that even the most random disasters might have some hidden purpose or warning. So, whether you believe Mothman is a cryptid, a supernatural entity, or just humanity's way of making sense of the senseless, one thing's clear: the legend isn't confined to Point Pleasant. It's woven into the fabric of global folklore, appearing wherever fear, mystery, and the unexplainable collide. You know, it's funny to think about how Mothman has evolved from a shadowy, fearsome figure lurking in the dark to something of a pop culture icon. Back in 1966, the very mention of Mothman sent shivers down spines in Point Pleasant. Today, he's got his own festival, a shiny statue, and even a surprisingly strong presence on the internet. It's like the cryptid version of going from indie artist to global superstar. Who would have thought that a giant, red-eyed, winged creature would become both a harbinger of doom and an adorable meme? Let's start where it all began: Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Instead of running from the legend, the town has fully embraced Mothman, turning what was once a source of fear into a thriving piece of local identity. Every September, thousands of people from around the world flock to Point Pleasant for the annual Mothman Festival. That's right, an entire festival dedicated to celebrating a creature that once terrified the town. The festival is a cryptid lover's dream: guest speakers, paranormal investigators, vendors selling everything from Mothman plushies to I Survived the Mothman mugs. There are TNT area tours, cosplay contests, and even pancake breakfasts, because apparently nothing says otherworldly terror like carbs. And right in the heart of town stands the Mothman statue that we talked about earlier. The artist, Bob Roach, designed it with dramatic wings and an almost majestic pose. It's as if Mothman isn't just a creature anymore. He's a symbol, standing watch over the town that made him famous. Beyond Point Pleasant, Mothman has found a second life, or maybe a second flight, in pop culture. He's shown up in movies, video games, podcasts, and more. You'll find him in everything from episodes of The X-Files to indie horror films, and even references in popular games like Fallout 76, where you can encounter a glowing-eyed Mothman in the post-apocalyptic wilds of West Virginia. But perhaps Mothman's greatest modern achievement? Becoming an internet meme? Yep, the same creature that supposedly foretells doom now stars in wholesome memes about emotional support, dating advice, and existential dread. There's soft Mothman art, where he's drawn as an anxious but lovable cryptid, just trying his best. And let's not forget the cryptid dating trend, where people jokingly list Mothman as their ideal partner. Because who doesn't want a tall, mysterious figure who's emotionally unavailable and has wings? But why does Mothman still capture our imaginations after all these years? Why do people dress up as him, attend festivals in his honor, and turn him into everything from folk art to plush toys? I think it's because Mothman represents more than just a cryptid. He's a mystery that never got solved. There was no conclusive aha moment, no body found, no definitive explanation. He's that lingering question mark in a world that's obsessed with having answers, and let's face it, we're drawn to the unknown. We love the idea that there might be things out there that science can't explain, that beyond our streetlights and Wi-Fi signals, something strange might still be lurking. Mothman also embodies our fascination with duality, fear and curiosity, darkness and light. He's both terrifying and oddly endearing. Maybe it's because deep down we like the idea that even our monsters have a story. Maybe they're not here to harm us, but to remind us of something bigger, something beyond ourselves. Whatever the reason, the Mothman's legacy continues to grow. He's more than a creature that people claimed to see in the 60s. He's a symbol of mystery, fear, fun, and the enduring power of storytelling. Whether you believe he's a harbinger of doom, an alien observer, or just a giant bird with a great publicist, one thing's certain: Mothman isn't going anywhere anytime soon. So after spending all this time diving deep into the legend of Mothman, the sightings, the theories, the conspiracies, and the cultural legacy, I find myself circling back to one simple question. Why do stories like this resonate with us? Why, after more than 50 years, are we still talking about a winged creature with glowing red eyes that terrorized a small town in West Virginia? I think part of the answer lies in something universal, our fear of the unknown. As human beings, we're wired to seek patterns, to make sense of the world around us. We like things that fit neatly into boxes with clear labels. This is safe. That's dangerous. This is explainable. But legends like Mothman don't fit into those boxes. They linger in the gray areas, in the shadows, where logic starts to feel just a little shaky. And let's be honest, there's a weird comfort in that, isn't there? As unsettling as these stories are, they remind us that the world is still full of mysteries, that maybe, just maybe, we don't have it all figured out. Think about it. Mothman isn't the first strange figure to capture our collective imagination, and he won't be the last. Throughout history, every culture has its own version of the unexplained, shadowy figures, cryptids, omens, and entities that defy logic. These stories stick with us because they tap into something primal. They challenge the idea that we're in control, that we understand how the universe works. And while that's a little scary, it's also kind of exhilarating. Stories like Mothman survive because they're not just about him, they're about us, about our fears, our curiosities, and our need to connect the dots, even when the picture doesn't make sense. Whether it's the villagers in Point Pleasant in the 1960s or someone scrolling through a Mothman meme at 2 a.m. today, the legend speaks to something timeless, the thrill of wondering, what if? Now, here's a question I've been chewing on. What's the role of legends like Mothman? Are they cosmic warnings, coping mechanisms to help us deal with tragedy and fear? Or are they just really, really good stories that refuse to fade? Maybe it's all of the above. In Point Pleasant, Mothman became intertwined with a real devastating event, the Silver Bridge collapse. Some people needed a way to process that tragedy, to give it meaning beyond random chance. Mothman became a symbol, not just of fear, but of the fragile line between normal life and sudden disaster. But beyond that, legends like this serve another purpose. They keep us connected. Whether we're swapping ghost stories around a campfire, attending a festival in West Virginia, or listening to a podcast like this one, these tales remind us that we're part of a larger, shared human experience. We're all just trying to make sense of the world in our own way, even if that means embracing the weird, the unexplained, and the downright spooky. So now I want to hear from you. After everything we've explored, what do you believe? Do you think Mothman was real? A flesh and blood creature hiding in the shadows? Or was he something more? A symbol? An omen? A reflection of our deepest fears and curiosities? Maybe he's both. Have you ever had an experience you couldn't explain? A shadow that didn't feel quite right? A strange feeling of being watched? Or even an encounter with something that left you questioning reality? I'd love to hear your stories, your thoughts, your theories, because that's what makes these legends so powerful. They don't just live in the past. They live on in the people who keep asking questions, who keep the wonder alive. Reach out, share your story, or even just your favorite Mothman meme. I'm here for all of it, and who knows? Maybe the next time you glance out your window at night, you'll catch a glimpse of something unusual. Just maybe don't wave, and you never know if he's the friendly type. At the end of the day, whether Mothman was a real creature, a supernatural entity, or simply the product of our imagination, his story has taken flight in ways no one could have predicted. And maybe that's the real magic, how a shadowy figure with glowing red eyes became more than just a local legend. He became a reminder that even in our modern world, with all its technology and explanations, there's still room for mystery. And just like that, we've come to the end of our deep dive into the legend of Mothman. What started with strange sightings in the woods outside of Point Pleasant has taken us on a journey through eerie encounters, tragic events, government conspiracies, and even international sightings. From the infamous TNT area to the bustling streets of Chicago, Mothman has proven that he's more than just a shadow in the night. He's a symbol of the unknown, a mystery that refuses to be neatly solved. We've talked about the eyewitness accounts, the terrified couples speeding down dark country roads, the miners in Germany saved from disaster, and even modern sightings that make you wonder if Mothman ever really left. We explored the theories, whether he's a cryptid, a supernatural omen, an interdimensional traveler, or, just a really misunderstood giant bird with an unfortunate knack for showing up at the worst possible times. We dug into the Silver Bridge collapse, one of the most tragic events tied to the legend, and asked the question, was Mothman a harbinger of doom or just an innocent bystander to a terrible accident? We explored the men in black, those unsettling figures who seemed just as strange, if not stranger, than Mothman himself. And we followed the story across the globe, from the Owlman in the UK to the shadowy figure soaring over Chicago's skyline. But beyond the sightings and the theories, we also looked at Mothman's impact on our culture. From Point Pleasant's Mothman Festival to his transformation into an internet meme sensation. He's gone from being a creature that sparked fear to one that inspires curiosity, community, and, dare I say it, affection. I mean, who knew that a giant winged cryptid could have such a dedicated fan base? Move over, Bigfoot. Now, before we wrap things up completely, I just want to say thank you. Whether you're a long-time listener of Legends and Lore, or this is your first episode, I appreciate you joining me on this journey into the strange and unexplained. Your curiosity, your open mind, and your willingness to explore the shadows with me, that's what keeps this podcast alive. And I'd love to hear from you. Do you think Mothman is real? Is he a cryptid, an omen, or just the world's most committed cosplayer? Have you ever had an encounter with something you couldn't explain? A strange figure in the dark, mysterious light in the sky, or even just a gut feeling that something wasn't quite right? Share your stories, your theories, your thoughts. Because at the end of the day, these legends aren't just about the mysteries. They're about the people who keep the stories alive. Now, if tonight's exploration of high strangeness wasn't enough, be sure to join me for the next episode of Legends and Lore, where we'll be diving into one of the most chilling and perplexing mysteries of the 20th century, the Dyatlov Pass incident, Russia's greatest mystery. In 1959, 9 experienced hikers set out into the icy wilderness of the Ural Mountains and never returned. When their bodies were found, the scene was so bizarre that even the investigators were left scratching their heads. Tents ripped open from the inside, strange injuries, missing tongues, and radiation levels that defied explanation. What happened on that frozen mountainside? Was it an avalanche? A secret military experiment? Something otherworldly? Trust me, you do not want to miss it. Until then, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, sometimes the scariest things aren't the monsters hiding in the dark. Sometimes they're the questions we're too afraid to ask. This has been Legends and Lore. I'm David Culpepper. Thanks for listening.